Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Happy Friday. Glad we all made it. As Jim was saying just before we rolled, it seems like a 4-day work week that felt like about a month. So buckle up as we get ready for the last couple months of this campaign. And today we have three martinis, and they're a little bit difficult to classify. I'd say the first one is mostly good, but a little bit mixed. The second one is thought-provoking. And the third one, I would say, is trending bad, but has the potential for a turnaround. So we will find out. Let's dig into our first martini. This one broke while we were recording yesterday, so we didn't have time to get to it. But Hunter Biden is deciding to skip his trial on the 9 tax offenses that he faced in federal court out in California, and he just decided to plead guilty. Now, originally, he was going to fight the charges. Then he and his lawyers, led by Abby Lowell, decided to offer what's known as an Alford plea, where you don't actually admit guilt, but you plead guilty. You maintain your innocence. And Andy McCarthy explained this a little bit on NRO, saying that criminal defendants do this a lot. They think they lose the case and they don't want the stiffer sentence, so they plead to something lower and they get a lighter sentence and so forth. So, but Jim, this case, first of all, on the good side of this is that the evidence was pretty lopsided against Hunter Biden here. His only real defense is, yeah, I did this, but I was so coked out of my mind that I'm really not responsible for it. Which is kind of the same defense he had in the gun trial, and we saw how well that worked out. And so it wasn't going to work out well for him. So CNN reporting yesterday that they tried to do this Alford plea. The prosecution, meaning the government attorneys from the Justice Department, said, no, we're not going to accept this. The judge in the case, a guy named Mark Scarsi, which CNN always points out as a Trump appointee, was also hesitant to take it. So then the Hunter Biden team said, okay, fine. We're just going to plead guilty. Throw themselves on the mercy of the court, see what the sentencing is. And so, Jim, on the one hand, it's good that he's going to be found guilty here. We'll see what the sentence is. The more calculated thinking here is that, A, Hunter Biden is trying to get this past the sentencing phase while his dad is still president, hoping to get a pardon out of him, since obviously Joe Biden can't trust too many other Democrats to do what he wants these days. And then the other thing is this tax deal could have exposed a lot more information that could have been damaging to the president himself. So what do you make of what we learned here?
Yeah, so this is technically the good martini. I think we'd probably both agree it's good but frustrating. Good in the sense that it ends the charade that Hunter Biden is just some, poor mixed up kid who is the right-wing prosecutors throughout the Department of Justice are out to get him, and this is all a witch hunt and blah, blah, blah. Look, the only reason he tried to claim the prostitutes as dependents on his tax returns was because he was high on cocaine. And that's the exculpatory. That's the good version, right? That's not the, and to the extent, it is satisfying to see that the president's statements like, my son got the Burisma job because he's the smartest man I know, and my son did nothing wrong. We always knew they were BS. We always knew they were nonsense. We always knew that this was all of us who are parents know that instinct of wanting to defend your kid, but this is not, breaking a window with a baseball or something like that. This is tax evasion, irresponsibly handling a gun, and getting jobs that were pretty much influence peddling. Now, from the very beginning, there's certain Democrats who were not in the Biden administration who are willing to put out a more plausible defense, and that is, look, Hunter Biden's always had a whole steep, long list of problems, and he has a really bad self-destructive streak. Joe Biden cares about his son a great deal, tried to do the best for him, but sometimes kids just don't, when I say kids, sometimes grown men just cannot solve their own problems. It's not that Joe Biden is pro-tax evasion. It's not that Joe Biden is pro-irresponsibly handling guns. And when you are a relative of a famous, powerful politician, every slime trail leaving scumsucker comes along and wants to be your friend. And Hunter Biden is really bad at turning down those friends, particularly when they keep shoving piles of money in his face. Or in the case of one Chinese businessman, like an 8-carat diamond or something like that, you put a person who has bad impulse control in an environment of constant temptation, you're going to have things like this. That's not a robust defense of the Biden family, but I think it's a more honest one and a more honest acknowledgement of one of saying that Joe Biden has only a limited amount of control or influence over Hunter Biden's decisions. And unfortunately, Hunter Biden almost every time makes the worst possible decision. If that had been the spin, people might have been more willing to cut more slack to Joe Biden. But Joe Biden wouldn't do that. Joe Biden kept insisting his son had done nothing wrong. Kept insisting his son was the smartest job. Like, there were people in the Obama administration who were very uncomfortable with the Burisma gig, but he took it anyway. What I find extremely frustrating about this is that for really going on, better a half a decade, maybe a decade, we've been having these arguments about Hunter Biden. And now with the de facto guilty plea, we were right the whole time. Every Hunter Biden defender was wrong the whole time. Where's our prize? What do we get for, there should be some consequences for this. Dear audience, lots of Democrats, including Joe Biden, lied to you over and over again about this stuff. And now it's exposed. So what are the consequences of that going to be? My suspicion is very little, and we'll see what the sentence is. But in the end, Hunter Biden was never a good guy. He was never just a misguided kid. He's older than you and I. We're not kids we used to be either. And also, the moment Joe Biden was no longer the nominee, you notice how much interest in Hunter Biden just disappeared. That he was no longer a useful tool for arguing Joe Biden should not serve another term because Joe Biden is not going to serve another term.
Yeah, the fact that the media tried to put him in the category of the presidential child. We don't, publicly go after presidential children, which was hilarious. I mean, if it's Chelsea Clinton, who's a teenager, obviously that's right. Remember the one Republican staffer who criticized what the Obama girls were wearing at the turkey pardoning? And man, that was like a week-long story. And now it's
cover of People magazine put the Bush twins.
Yes.
Right? People magazine, not a political magazine. Right by the supermarket checkout counter. It's, they found the Bush twins under age 18 allegedly drinking. That was a big news story to them. Everything else going on with every other kid, just not interesting. Not a story.
Yes, the double standards. And you'll have a lot of folks on the right saying, yes, he's guilty of all these things, but these are kind of the JV charges, all the influence peddling and the failure to register as a foreign agent and all sorts of other things. Some of those accusations have held up, other ones have not, but there's a lot there, and he's given the time left in the Biden administration. I don't think that the Justice Department's going to go there, but I guess we'll find out. Anyway, I shouldn't say that.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the most awkward transition in Pre-Martini Lunch history. Also, considering the name of our podcast.
Look, if you're, let's say, Hunter Biden's lawyers and trying to figure out how in the world to keep him out of jail after what evidence is clearly documented here, and now you've had to plead guilty, it's understandable you'd want to have a stiff drink, and you haven't even gotten to sentencing yet. Z-Biotics is the way you want to go, but take Z-Biotics before you start drinking, and you will feel better than you would have the next morning.
Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next morning. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, as always, and you will feel your best the following morning.
Yeah, as Jim says, you've got to drink responsibly. If you are completely irresponsible, you're still going to feel lousy the next morning, probably a little bit better than you would have otherwise. But the key is to know your limits, and in case you slip over the edge, you'll still feel better the next morning, and you won't have that rough next morning that you otherwise would have. So go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Jim, on to our second martini now, and this is the one we're describing as thought-provoking, and it relates to the Georgia high school shooting that we saw earlier this week. Horrific situation. 2 teachers, 2 students killed by a 14-year-old gunman who's now facing 4 felony murder charges. But of course, for the families of those lost, it's an incalculable loss. I can't even imagine the emotional toll that they're going through now and will be going through for a very long time here. But one thing we saw originated after a school shooting in Michigan and is being repeated here is the parents being charged. Up in Michigan, I think it was involuntary manslaughter. I don't know for sure, but it's gotten tougher here. This is the Washington Post. Georgia officials charged the father of the suspected Appalachia High gunman with 2 counts of second-degree murder Thursday, the most severe ever filed against the parent of an alleged school shooter. The arrest came less than 36 hours after 2 students and a pair of teachers were gunned down with an AR-15 style rifle that investigators allege the man allowed his 14-year-old son to possess. Along with the murder, the father was charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter and 8 counts of cruelty to children. I assume that's for those who were injured. The father, quote, knowingly allowed him to possess the weapon. His charges are directly connected to the actions of the son, said Chris Hosey, director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And so, Jim, the thought-provoking question here, of course, is if parents know that they are going to be held accountable for recklessly allowing, especially in this case, because he had been on the FBI radar, this kid last year, I guess, as a 13-year-old, but the FBI decided he wasn't a threat, even though they traced online school shooting threats to him, that you would pay more attention. Make sure your kids don't have access to the weapons that you possess legally, I would assume in most cases. Or is this projecting onto the parents for what their kids have actually done in terms of committing horrific crimes? And so it's an interesting question. The question is whether it's the right thing to do or not.
Yeah. The one very modest defense I will make of the FBI, and listeners of this podcast know we love to quote Die Hard and make fun of the FBI when they drop the ball. Apparently, the FBI did contact local police, and there's no clear sense of whether local police really followed up or took it seriously. So some of this might be seen as passing the buck, and you might say that the FBI really ought to follow up to say, hey, what do you think about this kid who seems like a likely school shooter? Seems fair to ask the FBI what the FBI does. We keep telling people, if you see something, say something. Well, people do in a shocking number of school shootings and mass shootings. Someone did say something, and someone did someone did see something, and someone did say something. I have, emphasized over and over again, if you think someone is at risk of committing a mass shooting, don't go to your university administrator. Don't go to your company's HR office. Go to the police. They are the people they and a judge are the only people who have the authority to remove firearms from someone who appears to be an imminent threat to themselves or to somebody else. If I were a prosecutor, I'd feel a lot better about the involuntary manslaughter charges than I do about second-degree murder. I think charging the parents for the father for second-degree murder is going to be a very difficult case to prove for a jury, but I guess it's one of the reasons we have to see what happens. One of the reasons I'm not... We've talked about far too many mass shootings in the course of this podcast.
Sure.
School shootings, Las Vegas shooting, all kinds of circumstances. And in almost every one, there's someone who comes forward afterwards and said, yeah, I really thought and there's all kinds of red flags, literal and metaphorical. There's all kinds of circumstances in which they say, yeah, we all said he was going to, go nuts and shoot up a place someday. And I'm sitting there thinking well, did anybody feel any need to do something like that? And I think in this case, particularly of parents, look, people have different ideas of what age is the appropriate age for a child or teenager to start handling a firearm. They obviously should always be doing so under the watchful eyes of a responsible adult. You should always be teaching your kid, even if you don't want to have a gun in the house, you don't want to own a gun. You should teach your kids what the rules of handling a firearm. The NRA used to do the Eddie the Eagle program. You want kids to be informed about this. If you have any inkling that your kid is angry at school and is looking up school shootings or looking up Columbine or something like that, you really need to have your guns locked up. You may even want to take your guns out of your house, put them in a storage facility, put them in a friend's house you trust or something like that. You do not want to have an angry, screwed up kid who is just sitting on a mountain of rage and looking for a chance and access to firearms. We've just seen it too many times in this country. Now, does this mean that a parent should be criminally liable? I don't know, but it sure as hell feels like you're morally liable, right? If you and here's the thing. Look, parenting is hard. You have 2 great daughters. I have 2 great teenagers. So they're still pretty good. God love them. But there's no doubt, and sometimes children go down paths we don't want them to go down, despite the best efforts. Joe Biden would endorse that message, right? If you think your child is capable of doing something rash, is capable of going off the handle, can't control all of these roiling emotions they have inside of them, you can't have them around a gun. I don't know whether a trigger lock is the right option for you. I don't know whether a gun safe is the right option for you, or as I said, getting the guns out of the house is the right option. But you have to get that kid into counseling. You have to get that kid into something to check into this. Maybe it's a brain chemistry thing. Maybe it's biological. Maybe, it sounds like this kid in Georgia had, look, mom had problems, not raised in a great place. Notice very often that there's rarely a father figure around in a lot of these mass shooters. But it's just so infuriating to hear the same story over and over again. And I suspect a lot of these people who did not report mass shooters before the worst has happened, they're not necessarily bad people. No one wanted this to happen. No one. I think they just found ways to tell themselves, it'll probably be fine. Or I don't want to make a fuss. I don't want to make a big stir. People are going to think I'm being paranoid. And in the case, they weren't. So look, you call up the cops and you say, hey, this kid is talking about shooting up a school. So, let the cops evaluate. Let the cops take a look. Maybe they'll do something. Maybe they won't. But at least you give the potential victims a fighting chance if you don't keep your mouth shut and if you do decide to take some sort of action. So that's my current thinking on this. I guess the jury will have to decide whether they feel that the father was that directly responsible. But I think if your kid has ever expressed anything about shooting up a school, you cannot let them have a firearm in their hands.
Especially after he's been flagged and visited by the FBI as a teenager, as a 13-year-old. That should be a red flag that you've at least got to be very, very cautious about where your weapons are and where your son is. And then there's another sentence here in this story from the Post. The boy's aunt told the Post that the teen had been, quote, begging the adults around him for mental health support in recent months, and a grandfather who clearly wanted the dad charged. So I don't know if that's like the other side of an estranged family trying to pile on here, or whether or not there really was a situation where this kid was begging for help and apparently didn't get it. So just incredible. There are a couple other nuggets to this story that are amazing. First of all, the fact that the school resource officer confronted him and kept the casualties much lower than they otherwise would have been had he not. And then also, he had left class, went and got his weapon, came back to class, the door was locked, and the student who went to open the door when the kid knocked saw that he had the weapon and then refused to open the door. Sadly, the kid went on to another classroom where he did the shooting, but the awareness to actually observe that sort of thing before you open a door is quite something. So very difficult questions. Just a horrible, horrible situation all the way around.
Will anyone reiterate how ridiculously expensive illegal immigration has become? The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet. Last year, our government spent $150 billion to take care of our illegal immigration problem. With inflation, that number is much worse. Has that number gone up in 2024? Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, Jim, back to political fare for our final martini. Somewhat good, could be better in some ways, frustrating. And that's the state of the... Have we covered all the...
We want to be wishy-washy, but everything is kind of a mixed martini today. Everything is kind of interesting. I'm not sure if I would have tasted it.
Yeah. We're experimenting with our martini recipes today. The state of the U.S. Senate, obviously most of the attention, as it is every presidential election year, is focused on the presidential race, and this year is no exception. But in your addendum to the Morning Jolt today, you point out that there's a decent chance Republicans will hold the majority in the Senate, regardless of how the presidential race turns out, because West Virginia looks pretty much as it can like a lock for a Republican flip with Jim Justice way ahead, Joe Manchin not running, and so forth. And then in Montana, at the moment, the Republicans seem to be a good 5, 6, 7 points, depending on the poll, ahead of John Tester. That's the Navy SEAL Sheehy there. But in other states that are competitive at the national level, Republicans haven't yet gotten over the threshold that they need to in some of these cases. Trump seems to be doing better than usual in Nevada, but Jackie Rosen's up in most polls by double figures on Sam Brown, who's got a great personal story and seems to be right on most of the issues. Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin has a frustratingly large lead over Eric Hovde, who's got more money than he knows what to do with, and most of his messages seem to be pretty on point, but the needle is just not moving. In Michigan, Debbie Stabenow is retiring. Alyssa Slotkin has a small but consistent lead over Mike Rogers, usually about 4 or 5 points. In Ohio, where Trump should win pretty comfortably. Sherrod Brown, it's getting a little bit tighter there. Last couple polls I saw him up by 2 or 3 points over Bernie Moreno, but you would think with that big of a Trump lead, the Republican would be doing better there. And of course, we've talked about what should be happening in Arizona and is not with Kari Lake, and in Pennsylvania, Dave McCormick's right around the bottom of the margin of error, but he still has, I've never seen a poll with him ahead of Bob Casey Jr. So lots of room for potential pickups here. But in terms of realistic pickups, right now, 2 months to go, so obviously a lot can change. Republicans not getting above that mark where they need to be.
Yeah, I was spurred to write this when our for a while, my double colleague, Henry Olson, wrote us an assessment of the Senate races, and the headline was, Republican chances of taking the Senate are looking great. And look, Henry's a very smart guy, and everything he writes in there is technically accurate. And yeah, if you had to pick today, you'd probably say Republicans starting January will have 51 seats, they'll have a majority, and that's great news. Right now, I think you walk through everything goes wrong. They're at 49. Manchin, which really should be a gimme, that's 50. You got a 50-50 Senate. Worst case scenario, Harris wins and Walz is breaking the ties. And if they win Montana, and he's looking good against Tester, not a lock, but looking good, that's 51. So you should be like, oh, isn't this great? I should point out, earlier today, before we taped this podcast, I did an event with the Washington Post with my illustrious colleague, Jen Rubin. And Rubin mentioned that Deb Fischer in Nebraska is in trouble. And the Democrats think they can take that one. Now, I haven't had to look. I wasn't even looking at Nebraska as a sense of a competitive race for this cycle. I will go and look, but color me very skeptical, and for a whole bunch of reasons. Not less the fact that Trump's going to win the presidential race in that state by a wide margin. But I remember 4 years ago, Jamie Harrison was going to beat Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, and then he won 55-45. Remember 2 years before that, Beto O'Rourke was going to beat Ted Cruz. Now we got closer, got within 3 points of them, but which is better than Texas Democrats have done a long time. And every couple of years, that Democrats talk themselves into believing they're going to beat Mitch McConnell. So the idea of we're going to win Nebraska, color me very skeptical. That said, if Republicans have 51 Senate seats in January, I don't think they should be saying, we did great. I think they really won almost every place that was a gimme. Now, you mentioned McCormick in Pennsylvania. CNN poll had him tied with Casey. It was the best news I've seen in a long time. Moreno, because Trump is supposed to win by such a wide margin, apparently there's some poll that has him up within 2. Okay. I just want to point out both Sherrod Brown and John Tester. It's 2024, which means 6 years ago, they're running in 2018, the backlash year in the midterms against Trump. 6 years before that was 2012. Barack Obama was running for re-election and running up a really wide margin. Democrats did really well before that. 6 years before that was 2006 and the backlash against Bush. So that was just the magic year. And every 6 years, you just have to have the wind at your back every single time. Maybe this is the year one or both go down. But I think, as you said, look, I know knocking off a Democratic incumbent is difficult. But you'd like to see Nevada competitive. You'd like to see Wisconsin competitive. These just, these are not California. These are not, in fact, I would have mentioned, there's a poll that had Larry Hogan and Angela Also Brooks. By the way, that is her surname. It's not Angela and Also Brooks. One poll had them tied, if you look at the Post poll, and then there was another one that had her up by 4 or 5 points. Look, if Larry Hogan can win a Republican seat in Maryland, then actually, this is a good year for Republicans and stuff. I think right now you'd probably say Also Brooks is at least a slight favorite, maybe more than that. We'll see how it checks out. So I think, look, there are a bunch of Republicans who are going to say, as long as we got a majority, it doesn't really matter. But really, a better crop of candidates, better fundraising, Trump and Vance being a little more this is a circumstance where Republicans really, with the wind at their back, could have won 55, 56 seats. And they're going to get 51, 52, maybe 53. There's going to be a little frustrating underachievement in what should have been a very generous cycle for them. So I guess it's a matter of perspective. You could say that's good news. You could also say, you're leaving a lot of seats on the table that you probably should have been able to walk away with.
No, that's true. And there's still time for some of them, especially one of those ones that are really close. I think the big miss on candidates, obviously, as we've mentioned many times, is Kari Lake. I think Steve Daines did a pretty good job of recruiting Sheehy in his own state of Montana. Mm-hmm. And Sam Brown is considered the guy he wanted in Nevada. It just hasn't worked out polling-wise. But we look at Mike Rogers and Hovde and McCormick. I mean, isn't Dr. Oz and Herschel Walker. I mean, these are people who can make a serious case for where they ought to be.
And also, we should point out, Trump is neck and neck in almost all these states. And in Ohio, he's well ahead. So you're kind of like, why are Republican Senate candidates, like Trump has his own problems. But here are these candidates, and Mike Rogers is not particularly Trumpy. He's not anti-Trumpy, but he's, most of these guys are fairly well established and just feels just not catching fire. Just not, they seem to be like 5-6 percentage points lower than where you'd think they'd be in an ordinary cycle.
And we're used to these people. Maybe they do pretty well in constituent services, and that makes a big difference. In terms of Nebraska, here's what I think is happening there. Do you remember a while back in Kansas when the Democrats knew they couldn't beat Pat Roberts, so they decided to get behind the independent in the race and pretty much kick the Democrat to the curb, and Roberts ended up winning anyway? That's kind of what's happening in Nebraska. They're all coalescing around this independent who's really a Democrat.
Yeah.
And so that race does seem to be fairly tight, but again, given the margin that Trump's likely to win statewide there, maybe not that one district around Omaha, but statewide, I'm guessing Deb Fischer, who's not exactly a controversial figure, should be able to get across the finish line. But that's what's happening in Nebraska. It's a little bit of that bait and switch like we saw with Evan McMullen in Utah and what they tried in Kansas.
I was going to say, it's the Egg McMuffin strategy. I'm sorry, Evan McMullen. Looking back on my choice in 2016, I would have been happier voting for an Egg McMuffin. It's got nourishment. It's got nutrients, protein.
Some substance is what you're saying.
Yes. It's not filler.
All right, Jim, real quick, kickoff of the NFL season. We're going to talk on Monday before the Jets actually play. Bears play on Sunday. A lot of expectations again. So assuming Aaron Rodgers' ligaments and tendons and everything stay intact, could be a pretty bullish year.
It could be bullish, or another word with bull in it here too. I am manic depressive this offseason. Look, on paper, the Jets have a really terrific roster and revamp the offense. I was watching this last night by the way, shocking last night. Kansas City Chiefs win on a very close call by the refs. Who saw that coming, other than Commissioner Goodell? But look, it's a tough, stacked AFC this year. I could see the Jets doing great. What I was talking about last night is that 40% of the Baltimore Ravens offensive line from last year now plays for the New York Jets. So they got that. They got Tyron Smith from the Dallas Cowboys. Like, on paper, this is a good team. They're healthy. They're opening the season at San Francisco. That is not an easy game, so we'll see how things shake out from there. I want to salute you because I actually also want to just observe that the Chicago Bears are in the most fun part of the rebuilding process. That rookie quarterback. I know you're like, really, after Justin Fields, you're going to tell me this again? But watching a rookie quarterback, you're not expecting to make the playoffs. You're not expecting to be serious contenders. You just want to see that potential. You just want to see that, even if you don't they miss the field goal, they don't win the game. If he can drive down the field in that final 2 minutes, and you see him growing and maturing and becoming the potential to be a next great NFL quarterback, that's going to make you feeling phenomenal. So I hope you have a lot to root for this year and have a lot of fun and excitement, and we will attempt to raid you in free agency next season.
Well, so here's what's going to happen. The Bears went undefeated in preseason, so expectations are building, especially on Bears Twitter.
And we know how hard everyone competes in preseason.
Yes, exactly. Then the first half of the season, they don't have any divisional games. They're playing the AFC South. So they start with the Titans, and then they play the Texans and the Colts. The Jags are in the first half of the season, and they're better than they used to be. They've got the Cardinals, the Patriots, the Redskins, or whatever they call themselves now, Commanders. So they're going to get through about...
that's a cream puff schedule.
They're going to get through mid to late October and think, oh, man, we're awesome. And then...
we're 6-2. We're 5-3. Playoffs, here we go.
Yeah, then reality is going to strike. So hopefully they can at least get to that point where the hype is building.
Then
we will see.
People will think I'm being sarcastic, but then you run into the buzzsaw of the Detroit Lions. And, obviously we're in the shit. I saw somebody, I can't remember who it was. I was working out. Yes, listeners, I work out. And on the screen, they didn't have sound, so I couldn't hear what he was saying. But the guy was picking a Super Bowl of the Detroit Lions and the New York Jets. Now, I know the Aztec calendar said the world was supposed to end in 2012. A Lions-Jets Super Bowl would strike me as one of those signs that you'd start seeing the earthquakes, the sky would turn red, and rain of frogs and all that. That would be a sign of the end, because I don't think Lions fans or Jet fans could deal with the excitement of a Super Bowl like that.
Yes, and if you have to beat Cleveland to win the AFC Championship,
Right?
that would truly be the sign that you're waiting for. So anyway, Jim, enjoy your weekend. You've earned it. I'll talk to you Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great weekend and join us again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.